The courtroom was dead silent. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that presses heavily on your chest, suffocating the air from your lungs. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo in the stillness. The soft shuffle of paper, the faint creak of the judge's chair, every tiny noise felt amplified, as though the very room was holding its breath. Standing beside the public defender, 17-year-old Khalil Dawson remained still, wrists shackled in front of him. His orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, a size too large, and his eyes stayed glued to the floor. He hadn't said a word since his arrest, and today his silence was suffocating. In the back of the room, his mother, Nina, sat with her hands tightly clenched in her lap, her knuckles white with strain. She hadn't slept in days, the exhaustion clearly evident in her swollen, bloodshot eyes that couldn't hide the depth of her grief. She had called every lawyer she could find, but no one responded. Some told her it was too late, others said it was too expensive. The judge didn't speak immediately. Instead, he flipped through a stack of papers, his face blank, unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice void of emotion, as if reading a grocery list. In the case of the state of Georgia versus Khalil Dawson, this court finds the defendant guilty on all charges. Sentencing is as follows: life in prison without the possibility of parole. His words landed with a harsh finality. No explanation, no break, no moment to digest the weight of what had just been said. The room held its breath. Nina couldn't breathe. A loud gasp escaped her lips, as though the air had been punched from her chest. No, please. You didn't do this. Please, Your Honor, she cried, trying to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. She collapsed to the floor with a dull thud, her elbows scraping painfully against the hard surface. Her sobs were raw, torn from deep within her. But no one moved to help her. Not the guards, not the bailiff, not even the lawyer who had been standing beside her son just moments before. The judge remained unmoved, never once looking in her direction. Khalil stood frozen, his body still, his face unreadable. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. In his hands, he held a small, crumpled piece of paper, a worn-out drawing. It was a charcoal sketch of his mother, reading a book under the lamp in their living room. He had drawn it the night before his arrest. Now, it was crumpled between his fingers, as fragile as the last thread of connection to a life that felt like it was slipping through his grasp. The bailiff stepped forward. "Let's go," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the stillness. Khalil didn't resist, didn't ask a single question. He followed the bailiff toward the side door. As he walked, he glanced over his shoulder and saw his mother still on the floor, her mouth moving, though whether she was praying or simply struggling to breathe, he couldn't tell. The door clicked shut behind him, a cold sound that echoed in his chest. The courtroom had already moved on to the next case, as though Khalil had never been there. He wasn't just sentenced, he was discarded, forgotten, erased, as though his existence never mattered. Before the trial, before the jumpsuit, before the sentence that had taken everything from him, Khalil Dawson was just a quiet kid with a sketchbook. He lived with his mother in a small, second-floor apartment on Westmore Street. One bedroom, a couch, a tiny kitchen. They didn't have much, but it was enough. It was home. Khalil wasn't the type to draw attention. He didn't talk much in class, never hung around in big groups. But he noticed things. He noticed how the teachers' shoulders tensed when they were having a bad day, how the light hit the side of the school building just right before the sun dipped below the horizon. He kept it all in his head, locked away. Later, he would put on paper. Khalil loved to draw, always had. He carried his sketchbook everywhere, during lunch, on the bus, wherever he went. Some of the pages were filled with faces, his classmates, teachers, strangers he saw on the street. Other pages captured scenes, like the broken fire hydrant in front of the corner store on 5th Street. And his favorite, his mother, asleep on the couch, lost in a peaceful dream. It was a life of quiet moments, captured in charcoal, unnoticed by the world. Khalil didn't show off his drawings. He didn't post them online or brag to anyone. He didn't need to. But there was one place where he felt truly seen. The county library, just 6 blocks from school. The library had an old scanner tucked away in the back corner near the genealogy section. It was slow, outdated, but it was clean, and it was his space. That's where he went every day after school to scan his best pieces. Miss Gloria, the librarian, always smiled when she saw him walk in. "Back again, Khalil. Those art schools won't know what hit them when they see your work." She meant it too. She was the first person outside of his mom to tell him he was talented, gifted even. Khalil would blush and give a shy nod. "Thanks, Miss Gloria," he'd mumble, then get to work. He scanned portraits, cityscapes, abstracts, anything he was proud of. Each file was carefully named and saved onto a flash drive. He had a goal, the Art Future Scholarship, a national program that could get him into a top-tier art school with a full ride. The odds were slim, of course, thousands of applicants from all over the country, but he believed. This was the biggest thing he'd ever tried for, the thing that could change his life. One day, the recommendation letter from his English teacher arrived. He didn't tell anyone immediately. He just slid into the inside pocket of his sketchbook and walked home slowly, like he was carrying something sacred. That night, after picking up a sandwich for himself in the corner store, he bought strawberries for his mom, her favorite. He always did that when he had a little extra allowance. When he got home, his mom was folding laundry in front of the TV. Khalil handed her the small container, and she smiled, tired but soft. "You remembered?" she asked. "Of course," he replied, already pulling out his pencil. He started sketching her, sitting there, folding a worn t-shirt, her brow furrowed in concentration. The curve of her hand, as it moved through the fabric, was captured in quick strokes. He didn't show her the drawing. Not yet. That one was for the scholarship folder, under a section he'd titled Home. He was saving it for later. It was a Thursday afternoon when it all changed. The kind of day where the sun is warm on your back, and for a moment, you forget that anything bad could be waiting just around the corner. Khalil had just finished scanning his artwork at the library. Everything went smoothly. He double-checked his files, packed up his sketchbook, and headed out the door. But first, he stopped by the corner store, Martinez Market. He went there all the time. He grabbed a bag of chips, a chocolate bar, and, of course, a small container of strawberries for his mom. It came to $6.75. "You working on something big?" Mr. Martinez asked, the friendly voice coming from behind the counter. Khalil nodded. "Scholarship stuff." Mr. Martinez smiled and handed him his change. Khalil stepped outside, the plastic bag in one hand, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. He'd only taken a few steps when it happened. Screech. Tires. 2 police cruisers came to a halt, fast and loud. No sirens, just flashing lights and the force of their presence. Before Khalil could react, a voice barked from behind him. "Get down. Hands where we can see them." He froze, confused, paralyzed. Then rough hands grabbed his arms, yanking him back, forcing him down to the pavement. His bag of snacks hit the sidewalk, and the strawberries exploded, their juice splattering across the ground in long red streaks. His sketchbook fell from his arm, pages fluttering in the wind, graphite smudging with each gust. He was slammed face first onto the concrete. His chest hit hard, knocking the air out of him. The metallic snap of handcuffs echoed in his ears as they dug into his skin. "Young black male, blue hoodie matches the description," one officer said, speaking to another. Khalil opened his mouth. He wanted to speak. He wanted to explain himself, to tell them about the library, about Miss Gloria, about his dreams. But no words came. His breath was stolen by the weight of the moment. The world around him moved on, but Khalil's world had just been shattered. Khalil's scholarship folder was tucked safely in his backpack, just a few inches away. But something held him back. It wasn't fear. It was memory. His mother's voice, quiet but firm, echoed in his mind. "If they ever stop you, baby, don't argue. Don't run. Don't even move. Stay still. Stay alive." So he stayed still. The concrete burned his cheek as the rough hands of the officers searched him. The chips in his bag were crushed underfoot. His chocolate bar lay in the gutter, abandoned. The strawberries, his mom's favorite, kept leaking, their juice trailing across the sidewalk in small red pools, heading toward the curb. And then there was his sketchbook. It had fallen open, pages ripped, exposing his artwork. One of them, a drawing of his mom curled up on the living room couch, was torn right down the middle. None of the officers glanced at it. One of them spoke. "We got a robbery on 47th. The taller cop nodded. "Game top. Witness says the suspect ran south in a blue hoodie." Khalil was still struggling to catch his breath, still trying to understand how everything had changed in less than a minute. "You fit the description," one officer muttered, as if that explained everything. Khalil tried to speak. He wanted to explain, to tell them where he had been, what he had been doing. "I was at the library," he began. "You can explain that downtown," the officer snapped back. No one asked his name. No one asked for ID. No one even checked the contents of his backpack. The back door of the police cruiser swung open, and a hand shoved his head down. As the door slammed shut behind him, Khalil glanced out the window. His sketchbook lay there on the sidewalk, pages fluttering in the breeze. That was the last thing he saw before the car pulled away. He hadn't been running. He hadn't been hiding. But none of that mattered, because it wasn't about the truth. They had already decided what kind of story they wanted, and Khalil was the perfect fit for the ending they had in mind. The first time Khalil met his public defender was just 10 minutes before the hearing. The man's name was Mr. Hayes. He wore a gray suit, his eyes tired, a folder in one hand and a phone in the other. He didn't sit down. He didn't ask Khalil many questions. He simply flipped through some papers, glanced up briefly, and said, "Anything you want to say before we go in?" Khalil hesitated. "I was at the library. Miss Gloria saw me. There's footage they can check." Mr. Hayes nodded, barely listening, then muttered, "We'll see what we can do." The door opened, and they were called into the courtroom. It was almost empty. No jury, just a handful of staff, a sleepy-looking bailiff, and Judge Roland Pierce sitting at the bench. Khalil was still in cuffs, wearing a loose-fitting borrowed suit, the sleeves hanging too long over his wrists. His mother sat behind him, her eyes hollow and sunken, her hands shaking in her lap. The hearing began quickly. Docket number 2039A, People versus Khalil Dawson. The prosecutor, a young woman in a crisp navy suit, stood without even looking at Khalil. She presented the case in 3 short minutes. A blurry still image from a GameStop security camera. A glove found in Khalil's backpack, the kind that artists use to keep graphite off their hands. A partial fingerprint on that glove. That was their entire case. Mr. Hayes said nothing at first. When prompted by the judge, he stood awkwardly and cleared his throat. "My client is a student with no prior record. He was at the public library at the time of the alleged robbery. Do you have any witnesses?" the judge asked, his voice devoid of interest. "No, Your Honor. We've been unable to reach the librarian." Then came the only time Khalil tried to speak. "Please, I wasn't there. Ask Miss Gloria. She'll tell you." The prosecutor immediately cut him off. "This isn't debate club. You're not here to talk." Khalil fell silent. The judge didn't respond. He didn't ask about the librarian. He didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't even look at Khalil. At the clerk's desk, Elena Vargas was typing everything as it unfolded. She had worked under Judge Pierce for nearly 5 years. She knew how he operated, fast, cold, final. But something about this case made her stomach twist. There were files she remembered seeing. The look in Khalil's eyes, the way he had sat there, silent but trying to make his voice heard, left a nagging feeling in her gut. Something wasn't right. But in this court, the truth seemed to have no place. The day before, there had been a time-stamped traffic cam photo from near the library, a report about the surveillance camera malfunction at GameStop, a discrepancy in the glove sizing. But now, those files were gone, vanished, replaced by a smaller folder with far fewer pages. Elena Vargas checked the system twice. Then again, but they weren't there. She couldn't speak. Not yet, not in this room. The judge leaned forward, his gaze fixed. The court finds the evidence sufficient for trial. Bail is denied. His gavel came down with finality. The sound echoed through the marble courtroom like a door slamming shut, sealing off any hope. Khalil turned slightly, attempting to glance back at his mother, but the bailiff was already pulling him toward the side exit. His mother's mouth opened to speak, but no sound came out. And still, Judge Pierce never once looked at the boy he had just silenced. It wasn't a trial. It was a script, a process, a decision already made long before Khalil ever stepped foot in that courtroom. No matter how loudly the truth tried to be heard, the system had already chosen to ignore it. 3 weeks after the arrest, Khalil sat on the edge of a narrow bunk in the juvenile detention center. The walls were gray, the lights never fully off, casting a perpetual sense of time dragging on endlessly. He couldn't remember what it was like to feel time move. It just crawled. That evening, during phone call hour, a guard tapped him on the shoulder. "You get one call. Make it quick." Khalil stood slowly, his hands feeling heavy, his fingers tingling from gripping a pencil too tightly for too long. There was only one number he knew by heart, and it wasn't his mom's. She couldn't afford to accept a collect call. Even if she could, what could she do? The number he dialed was one his mom had made him memorize when he was 10, back when the man on the other end still sent birthday cards now and then. Khalil had never used it, not once until now. His finger pressed each digit slowly, one by one. The line rang all the way to Washington, D.C., where Luther Pryor, the U.S. Attorney General, was in the middle of a press conference. "Our department remains committed to the principles of justice and equity." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. Same number, unknown. Something about it made him pause. He lifted his hand slightly and excused himself from the podium. He walked into the side hallway, quiet and neutral. No press, no lights, just the hum of the air vents. He answered, "This is Luther Pryor." "Who is this?" Silence. A breath. Then a voice he hadn't heard in 10 years. Deeper now, but still familiar. "It's me. Your son. I need help." Luther didn't speak immediately. It wasn't just the voice. It was everything he had walked away from, the unopened letters, the missed holidays, every decision to stay out of it now calling him back. The silence stretched out between them. On the other end, Khalil almost hung up, but then Luther spoke quietly, his voice shaking. "Where are you?" "Georgia. Fulton County. Juvenile lockup." Another pause. "What happened?" Khalil swallowed hard. "They said I robbed a GameStop." "I didn't. I was at the library." "They won't listen." His voice cracked. "They gave me life. No parole." Luther leaned back against the wall, his hand trembling. The hallway felt colder now, quieter, that kind of quiet, the kind that demands everything. An hour later, Luther sat alone in his office. The lights were dimmed low, the blinds drawn tight. His suit jacket draped over the chair, his tie loose around his neck. He stared at nothing in particular, his mind far from the piles of reports and drafts of speeches on his desk. Policy papers, reform initiatives with bold titles like Justice Reimagined. They all felt meaningless now. For all the work, all the power, and all the promises, none of it had stopped this moment from happening. Luther Pryor had spent his career championing fairness and equality, preaching about the system that he believed in. Yet, in one 5-minute phone call, he realized that same system had failed the one person he vowed never to leave behind, his own son. He hadn't been able to protect Khalil, and that truth settled in his chest like a cold, heavy weight. That night, Luther didn't sleep. After the call with Khalil, he sat alone in his darkened office. The lights were off, his tie loosened, and the silence pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. The U.S. Attorney General, the top law enforcement official in the country, and yet his son sat locked inside a concrete cell, sentenced to a lifetime of imprisonment. The reality of it gnawed at him. He didn't reach for a drink, nor did he reach for any speeches he'd written over the years. Instead, he opened his laptop. His fingers hesitated for a moment, then typed. Dawson Khalil, Case 1245 JD, Fulton County. The documents loaded slowly, one line at a time, image after image. The first red flag appeared almost immediately. The traffic cam footage, which supposedly showed Khalil near the crime scene. The metadata was wrong, altered. The shadows didn't align with the sun's position that day, and the license plates in the background were unnaturally sharp. Too perfect, too clear. Deepfake. Luther forwarded the file to his cybersecurity advisor, his mind racing. He opened the forensic report next. A partial glove print had been marked inconclusive in the initial lab notes, but in the final version, it was labeled as a probable match. He cross-checked the lab's record. It wasn't the first time that language had been manipulated to make evidence appear more convincing than it was. Then, Luther pulled up Judge Roland Pierce's record, and that's when everything shifted. He went through charts and sentencing patterns, dozens of juvenile cases, almost all involving young black males. The statistics were damning. Average trial time, 1.8 days. Defense objections routinely overruled. Plea deals ignored. Maximum sentences in 94% of cases. Each piece of information felt like a personal betrayal, not just of the law, but of what the law was supposed to represent. By morning, Luther had printed a dozen reports. He looked at them spread across the floor of his office, each page like a crime scene photo. If I do this, he thought, I'll destroy everything I've built. The policies, the reform packages, the future political steps. Because this wasn't just about one corrupt judge. It was a system designed to protect itself. Exposing it would be devastating. The backlash would be relentless. Later that afternoon, Luther made one call. Professor Matthews, now retired and living in North Carolina, had taught him tort law and constitutional ethics. More importantly, Matthews had never been swayed by political interests. They met at a quiet cafe near the DOJ building. Luther sat down, his eyes hollow. I need to ask you something, he said, voice heavy. And I need you to tell me the truth. Matthews stirred his coffee slowly, sensing the gravity in Luther's tone. Go ahead, he said. If it were your son, and you knew the system had failed him, what would you do? Matthews looked him in the eye, his answer unwavering. I'd remember why I became a lawyer, and I'd burn the whole system down if I had to. That night, under the cover of darkness, Luther returned to the DOJ. No briefings, no press, no cameras, just a single-minded sense of purpose. He summoned 4 junior attorneys, all under 30. Smart, unjaded by cynicism, the kind of people who still believe the law could mean something. Sarah Chun, a tech law expert. Marcus Wright, criminal defense. Daniela Ruiz, civil rights litigation. Jamal Thomas, federal procedure. They gathered in a quiet conference room, blinds drawn, phones off. Luther spoke simply. You don't speak of this outside this room. You report only to me. We're opening an investigation into Judge Roland Pierce and every case he's touched in the last 10 years. Sarah blinked in confusion. On what grounds? Corruption, suppressed evidence, judicial misconduct. You'll see it all, Luther replied, handing them flash drives marked only by color. Start with Khalil Dawson. But don't stop there. He had spent his whole life climbing the ranks of the justice system. Now, the only way to save his son was to tear that system down. Not for revenge, not for politics, but for truth. And this time, Luther wasn't going to look away. Elena Vargas had always been the kind of person the system liked. Quiet, efficient, invisible. She typed fast, kept her head down, and followed the rules. 5 years under Judge Pierce had taught her how to survive. Don't ask questions, don't get noticed, don't care too much. But now, every time she closed her eyes to sleep, Khalil Dawson's face appeared in her mind. The quiet kid with the sketch pad. Just a boy. The email had been short, to the point. No name, no signature. I have documents, internal memos, evidence that was removed. Please meet. No cameras, no names, just truth. Her hand hovered over the mouse, and with a quick breath, she clicked send, immediately regretting it, but by then, it was too late. 2 days later, in a quiet cafe near downtown, Elena waited. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a couple sitting at the far wall and a barista humming off key behind the counter. Outside, the cars passed slowly under the spring sun. Elena sat near the window, her wool coat wrapped tight around her, a worn canvas bag on her lap. Inside that bag was a single USB drive. Her fingers traced the stitching of the bag repeatedly, the motion almost mechanical. Then 2 people walked in, early 30s, dressed in plain clothes with sharp, alert eyes. They spotted her instantly. Sarah Chun and Marcus Wright from Luther Pryor's private task force. They sat down across from her, cautious but kind. Miss Vargas? Sarah asked gently. Elena didn't answer. She simply reached into her bag and slid the USB drive across the table, pushing it silently toward them. Everything's on there, she said in a low voice. The original traffic footage, memos, internal notes. Watch the timestamps. Judge Pierce pulled Khalil's file the morning before it was reassigned. Her voice dropped even further, and she glanced over her shoulder. He moved the case to his own docket. Broke protocol. No review. Sarah frowned. Why would he do that? Elena paused, her gaze shifting upward. Because his nephew, Thomas Pierce, is the director at Central Juvenile Detention, the same facility Khalil was sent to. Marcus' jaw tightened. That wasn't disclosed in court. It was buried like everything else. Elena reached for her coffee cup, realizing it had gone cold hours ago. She stared at it for a moment before speaking again, her tone soft. A week ago, someone broke into my apartment. Sarah's brows furrowed. What did they take? Elena let out a hollow laugh, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. They didn't take my laptop. They didn't touch my jewelry. They rifled through my brother's immigration papers. His green card file. Sarah's eyes widened. That's a threat. Elena nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, I got the message. She fell silent for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle over her. Then she reached in her coat pocket and pulled out a folded note. Khalil's sketch, a small, rough pencil drawing he'd left behind on his courtroom bench. The sketch was of her, head down, a little tired but a little proud. Elena's voice cracked as she spoke. He used to draw in court. Little things, corners, people. He saw everything, even me. Her eyes glistened as she looked up at Sarah and Marcus. That's why I'm here. Not because I'm brave. I'm not. But he saw me when no one else did. And now the whole system's pretending not to see him. She exhaled deeply. I can't stay quiet anymore. He was just a boy, and they're trying to erase him like he never mattered. Sarah and Marcus didn't speak immediately. They just watched her, not with suspicion, but with something close to awe. Not every hero shows up wearing armor. Some show up in sensible shoes, clutching a cup of cold coffee, refusing to disappear. Elena Vargas was never meant to be a hero. She was just a court clerk, footnotes in the system, a silent hand behind a record. But in a system built on silence, even a whisper can spark an earthquake. And in that cafe, one whisper was about to shatter everything. The prison was the same, gray, damp, and still. But something inside Khalil had changed. He wasn't sleeping, not well at least. The nights bled into one another, a long corridor of silence that seemed to stretch on forever. But within that silence, Khalil began to draw. It started with Marcus, the older man from the laundry unit, a gentle giant with soft eyes and a daughter who wrote poems for her school recital. Khalil asked him to describe her. She's got my nose, Marcus said with a smile, and her mama's stubbornness. Khalil drew her too, in the corner of the page, standing on a stage made of notebook paper. Next came Deshawn, barely 18, who sang old Motown songs while mopping the floor. Then Carlos, who dreamed of owning a food truck. Tony, who loved sci-fi books and had read Dune 3 times. William, who coaxed green life from plastic containers in the prison courtyard. Each sketch was more than just lines. It held memory, voice, presence. One day during rec time, Jamal, Khalil's quiet, watchful cellmate, handed him a bundle. Got it from the library lady. Real paper, not the cheap kind. Inside were 5 sheets of textured artist paper, the kind Khalil hadn't touched since the day of his arrest. Jamal leaned in. Use it before they take it. In here, what you make, that's the only thing they can erase, Jamal said quietly. Word started to get around. The guards began watching him, not openly, but with an unnatural quiet as he passed by. They were a little too interested in what he was holding in his hands. So Khalil worked faster. And when Miss Lavinia, a retired schoolteacher volunteering for literacy tutoring, came by, he slipped an envelope into her supply tote. No name, no return address, just one word written in pencil. Inside Voices. 2 weeks later, the sketches began to circulate. First among the community art collectives, then on social media, and finally in civil rights forums. People didn't see them just as drawings. They saw them as declarations. Each portrait carried a name, a story, a favorite song lyric, or a quote from a daughter's poem. One sketch showed an older man with his eyes closed, captioned, "She used to hum gospel while cooking. I still hear it in my sleep." Another, a young man staring out a cell window, read, "I only ran because I was scared, not because I was guilty." The campaign quickly caught fire. Inside voices trended across multiple platforms. Human rights lawyers reposted. Artists offered to replicate the works as murals. One gallery in D.C. even cleared a wall for a full installation. Meanwhile, back in his cell, Khalil heard nothing. No internet, no news, no sound from the outside world. But one day during library hour, a new inmate passed him a slip of paper. It read, "People out there are starting to hear us. They see what you drew. They see us." Khalil folded the note slowly, tucking it into the spine of his sketchbook. He whispered to no one in particular but to the space around him. "You can lock us up, but you can't erase who we are." In a place built to strip away identity, Khalil had found a way to give it back. Not just to himself, but to everyone the system tried to reduce to numbers. With pencil and paper, he was turning inmates back into people. The hearing room smelled of old paper and polished wood. Golden morning light spilled through high windows, casting long shadows over senators hunched over their folders. In the center sat Luther Pryor, no longer just the Attorney General. This morning, he wasn't a politician. He was a father. This wasn't just another briefing. This was a reckoning. He didn't read from a script. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached for a thick dossier and laid it on the table. Luther Pryor's hands were steady, but only just as he placed the thick dossier in front of him. The silence in the room felt heavy, pressing against his chest as he turned the first page. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Sentencing logs, racial breakdowns, case timelines that barely lasted 48 hours. Each page spoke the same quiet horror. Fast-track trials, maximum sentences, young black boys vanishing without a second thought. Luther didn't need to dramatize the numbers. They did that for him. But then, with a small click, he pressed a button. The room darkened, and the projector screen lit up. But it wasn't graphs or statistics that filled the screen. It was faces. Khalil's portraits, one after the other, came into view. A man with weary eyes and a crumpled poetry page in his pocket. A teenage boy, staring through a window drawn in graphite. A father holding a child's toy under a caption. "She still asks when I'm coming home." The room held its collective breath. On the other side of the Capitol, the streets were anything but quiet. Protesters filled the marble steps, banners held high. "Justice for Khalil. Erase corruption, not our kids." Inside voices, outside truth. A group of law students formed a silent circle, each holding a printed portrait. Above them, on the courthouse wall, a massive projection of Khalil's sketchbook flickered in the sunlight. The media exploded. News anchors spoke in hushed tones as they played split screens. On one side, Luther stood at the podium, jaw clenched in restraint. On the other, Khalil's pencil drawings scrolled across the screen like testaments. New York Times, justice system rocked by evidence of judicial bias. NPR, Teens Our Campaign becomes national movement. CNN, Inside Voices exposes years of courtroom misconduct. The pressure wasn't just political anymore, it was personal. Back inside the hearing room, Luther spoke again, his voice softer now, almost to himself. "I once believed the system could fix itself. I believed in the slow crawl of justice." He looked up, meeting the senator's eyes one by one. But justice delayed isn't justice. And for too many, it's never even been an option. That day, Luther didn't just expose one corrupt judge. He peeled back a curtain the nation had refused to touch, revealing a rot that stretched far beyond Khalil. And in doing so, he turned the whispers of injustice into a nationwide roar. Outside, the chant rose like a tide. "Justice for Khalil. In racist courts. We see you now." In that moment, it wasn't just about one boy. It was about all the names that had never been spoken, all the faces the courts had turned away from. And now, the nation was finally looking. The federal appeals courtroom was nothing like the one where Khalil had first been sentenced. There were no fluorescent flickers, no rush files, no eyes that looked past him as if he didn't matter. Here, The light poured in through arched windows. Here, they were ready to listen. Judge Diana Martinez sat at the bench, her presence calm but commanding. She was a woman who had once defended the very people the system had forgotten. She adjusted her glasses, looked around the room, and nodded. We will now hear the appeal of Mr. Khalil Dawson. This time, Khalil wasn't alone. Beside him sat a team of civil rights attorneys. Behind him, his mother, Luther, and the weight of a nation watching. The evidence was laid bare. Tampered footage, buried reports, a judge with financial ties to the very prison Khalil had been sent to. Then came the voice no one had expected, Elena Vargas. She was a witness hidden behind a screen, her voice distorted, but her words cutting through the silence. She spoke of late-night document removals, of trial records sealed too quickly, of Judge Pierce pulling Khalil's case and bypassing all standard protocol. Her voice shook at first, but soon steadied. He knew the boy was innocent, and he chose to silence him. When the testimony ended, a hush fell over the room. Judge Martinez turned to Khalil. Her tone wasn't cold like Pierce's. It was careful, human. Mr. Dawson, she said softly, before I deliver the... Is there anything you'd like to say before I deliver the ruling? Judge Martinez asked. Khalil stood, still thin, still quiet but steady. He glanced at his mother, then at Luther, and then out toward the world beyond the courtroom. I didn't want to be a symbol, he said softly. I just wanted to make art, but if what happened to me helped someone else, then maybe it was worth it. He sat back down and waited. Judge Martinez didn't hesitate. Based on the overwhelming new evidence, including proof of judicial misconduct and due process violations, this court vacates the previous conviction. Mr. Khalil Dawson, you're free to go. There was no outburst, no dramatic gasp, only the quiet sound of a mother weeping into her hands, and the slow, deliberate exhale of a boy who had been holding his breath for far too long. That night, back in his old bedroom, Khalil sat on the edge of his bed. The posters were faded, the books untouched, but the silence now felt different. No longer oppressive, just open. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, walked to the wall, and pinned it up. Blank, white waiting. A beginning. They tried to erase him, his voice, his future, his name. But now, the whole world is listening. And Khalil? He's just getting started. If Khalil's story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac Stories for more powerful human stories that deserve to be told. Your support helps us keep going. One voice, one truth, one story at a time.